Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about books I'm a hypocrite about. There are plenty of books out there that play on a certain trope and I love it, and then other books that play on that exact same trope and I hate it, or whatever the reason. This is meant to be a lighthearted video, so, take it in jest, but the point of the video is just talking about some things that I'm a little bit inconsistent about. And I don't think it's a problem, because a lot of times the reason why I would like it in one book and not in the other is just preferences. A lot of times it's execution. I loved the way it was executed in this book and I didn't connect with the way it was executed in that book. It's really not a big deal. Take it all with a lighthearted spirit that I mean it in. But first, before we get into it, shout out to Leanne's Library, because she is the one that I saw do this video, loved the way she did it, and made me realize I have a lot of these too. So I'll have her video linked down in the description. I love Leanne. She's a fantastic person. So check her videos out. She has such high quality. You should just go check her out. She's really into a lot of great genres. She loves Joe Abercrombie. We're buddy reading Malazan soon. You should just go show her channel some love. I guess I'll kick it off with a recent read. I recently read House in the Cerulean Sea, which I really enjoyed. Most of the books on this list are books that I still enjoyed. I just didn't, it was more of like a, yes, this was good, and less of a, oh my goodness, I loved this. So preface that as well. But anyway, House in the Cerulean Sea, I enjoyed this book. I have a video, spoiler-free, linked over there, and it was really, really cute. It's a story about a man who is a caseworker for this organization that monitors orphanages filled with kids with magical abilities, or who are certain, they're creatures, and he is on a high-profile case to go to an orphanage that has a child that could potentially cause a lot of harm, and he's gonna inspect it. And then it's a really sweet feel-good book. So I went into this book knowing that it is a feel-good book. My friend Lynn was calling it the hug book. It makes you feel warm and fluffy inside. The point of the book is really more about the moral things that it's trying to articulate, and less about the world or the magic or anything else. Really, it's about the things that the author was trying to discuss with the reader. So I should love it, because we have books like The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, the Horse. Why is it so hard? We have books like that I absolutely adore, that the whole concept of the entire book is, I'm trying to talk to you about something. We have Frederick Bachman, who's one of my all-time favorite authors, and everything he writes is about the discussion being had, not so much about the story being told. And I read his books for the discussions. We have books like Winnie the Pooh that I love so much, that's just adorable, and also has some concepts that we're trying to discuss within it. It doesn't make sense that House in the Cerulean Sea wasn't up there with the rest of these, but it wasn't. And I think it's because this book was fantasy. Now, somebody in the comments of my review called it a cozy fantasy, kind of like a cozy murder mystery. You don't expect it to be a big focus on the murders and the crime. If it's a cozy murder mystery, you know what you're getting into by that title, and calling this a cozy fantasy helps you kind of curb your expectations. And I really, really liked that description for House in the Cerulean Sea. But I think just the fact that it was a fantasy and that it's a fantastical world. I mean, we're on Earth, but there's fantastical elements to this world. We're dealing with fantastical creatures. I had a hard time just saying, don't think too hard about anything that's being said except for the morals. Don't think too hard about the world building. Don't think too hard about anything that we're discussing other than the hard-hitting discussions. Again, I still really enjoyed The House in the Cerulean Sea, but for whatever reason, I couldn't get there with this one. And I think that's why, but I still really enjoyed it. Next we have Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I enjoyed this book as well. The characters were phenomenally written. Their relationships, I loved watching Norrell and Strange interact. I loved their dynamics. I loved the type of people that they were, the type of people that you wouldn't really want to actually interact with in real life, but they're such a pleasure to read from. I thought that, what's her name? Susanna Clark. I thought that Susanna Clark's writing style was top notch. She had this beautiful blend of feeling like I was reading a classic, even though it's not a classic, and her prose hit me just right. They weren't flowery or over the top, but they also weren't simple and just there. You really had to think about what she was saying, but in the most natural and beautiful way. The world was really cool. It was a soft magic system, which was a little bit difficult for me, but I ended up falling into rhythm with it, and I liked a lot of the things that she was doing. It was really cool. It was so well done. This is an excellent book, but for whatever reason, it's one of those books where I read it and I enjoyed it, and I have high praises for it, and yet I don't really ever feel the need to talk about it because it just didn't fully connect with me for some reason. Then you have an author like Joe Abercrombie, whose writing is gorgeous and I love it, and it's intentional and it's good, and his characters are really, really, really well written, and their dynamics, I eat up the character relations the character dynamics that he builds. And just like Strange and Norrell, where it was a very, 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 very slow-paced book, and therefore I kept losing interest even though I was overall enjoying it, The Blade itself is essentially plotless. I'm exaggerating. There's plot there. It's just not really much of a focus at all. It doesn't make sense that I love Joe's work so hard, and yet Susanna's book, the one book I've read, I'm still gonna read more of her books, but Strange and Norrell, I couldn't quite get there. It doesn't make sense, and I actually don't get this one. The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, I've talked about this a lot on my channel. I'll link a video where I talk about it more in depth, but I'll leave it pretty simple here. It's a story about a man who owns a bookstore. He's grumpy, and then a kid is dropped on his doorstep. He decides to raise this kid. He gets a little bit less grumpy. It's his abridged life story. It says the storied life, but really we're hitting little sections with big old time jumps. I'm sorry, this is actually one of the books that I just didn't like. And again, it comes down to execution here, because Fredrik Backman writes so many books in a similar manner. In fact, when I first started The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, I loved the first half of it, and I was like, this is my next Fredrik Backman. I'm gonna read all this author's work. I'm so excited. If you watched the reading vlog, what a journey. I went from absolutely losing my mind over loving this book so much to being so mad at it. And I still haven't read A Man Called Uva by Fredrik Backman. I'm going to soon, I promise. But these stories are very similar, A.J. Fikry and A Man Called Uva, as far as I understand it. And I love everything I read by Backman. Even my least favorite Backman books that I have a lot of criticism for, I still really enjoyed, and I'm glad that I read. In this book, the execution did not connect with me at all, even though they're both literary fiction. They're doing the same thing. They're just doing them a little bit differently. And it's not even like, oh, I respect what you were doing. It's like, I didn't like it. But again, I know a lot of people love this book, so I love that people love this book. It just super didn't work for me. Six of Crows. This is another book that I don't have hard feelings toward. I think I gave it like 3.5 or something like that when I read it. I enjoyed myself, but it didn't quite work for me. I thought it had a really long beginning. Took forever to really get to what we were doing, and the character dynamics were very good. Leigh Bardugo did a good job with creating their dynamics, but there were also a lot of character things that just didn't make sense to me, and that I couldn't get fully immersed in the book because there were so many immersion-breaking things, like their age and their backstory didn't fit their age, or their personalities didn't fit their age at all, which I know is something that's widely talked about for this duology, but there's several things like that that just kept pulling me out of the book because it it didn't fully fit. But I still overall enjoyed reading the book. I still continued on to the sequel, and I enjoyed Crooked Kingdom. I still have good feelings about it. It's just not a book series that, or a duology that I really feel any need to ever talk about, because I just don't really have feelings about it. Enter The Lies of Locke Lamora and Best Served Cold, which of course they're not the same thing, but they are all playing on the same or similar tropes. A ragtag band of ne'er-do-wells and less than moral people coming together to pull off some sort of heist-like something in order to get their revenge, or in order to plot some sort of, they're not the good guys. Of course, in all of these worlds, they're dark worlds, so there's not really very many good guys in these worlds in general. There's a lot of parallels. They're very different stories, but there's a lot of parallels. And The Lies of Locke Lamora, the Gentleman Bastard series, my all-time favorite series. Best Served Cold? Oh my goodness, I loved it so much. Joe Abercrombie is one of my favorite authors ever, all the time. And Best Served Cold is my favorite book by him so far that I've read. I loved The Lies of Locke Lamora, and well, all of the Gentleman Bastard books that are out, and Best Served Cold so much, but Six of Crows didn't really work for me. I didn't dislike it, but it's not something that I ever really feel the need to talk about, whereas these two, I won't shut up about. And do you know what? Part of my problem with Six of Crows is how long it took to get there. And these two books, The Lies of Locke Lamora and Best Served Cold, they are such slow-paced books. And well, actually, that's not true. Best Served Cold is actually wonderfully paced. The Lies of Locke Lamora is such a slow book, and it takes forever to get to where we're going, and to get to, you know, the buildup is very much there. And there are definitely certain character dynamics and certain situations in both The Lies of Locke Lamora and in Best Served Cold that made me raise my eyebrows and go, I don't know about that. But I was able to move on because I just loved the execution of the story so much, whereas with Six of Crows, I couldn't really get past those things and get full immersion. Inconsistent she is. Then you have just revenge plots in general. Now don't get me wrong, that whole section, a lot of these books are revenge plots, especially Best Served Cold is just a ruthless revenge plot. And Leanne talked about this in her Books I'm a Hypocrite About video, because she didn't like Rage of Dragons, but she loves Best Served Cold, as every cultured person does. But revenge plots, especially revenge plots like Rage of Dragons, usually are a miss for me. This main character that is so hyper fixated on revenge that that's all they care about, and they'll make the dumbest choices because this is all they care about. And it's hyper fixated. It's a very like battle focused book. All these things are things that I shouldn't like. And yet I loved it in Rage of Dragons. I loved the world that Evan Winter built. I loved the side characters in Rage of Dragons, which a lot of people don't think that they're that great. I loved them. And I thought that it was a really fresh take on these tropes that typically don't work for me. It's one of those books where it's like, I recommend it, and in my mind I think, I shouldn't like this, but I just do. I like it so much. And while I think that Tao is not the strongest protagonist because he's so hyper-focused on one thing to the point that it's almost all of his personality, almost all of his character traits is revenge, which I see Evan, especially in book 3, I see him moving away from that hyperfixation, but we'll see. But for whatever reason, this one really works for me. Like, really, really, really works for me, despite me reading it and thinking, I shouldn't like this, but I just really do. I'm going to end this video on something that I could probably use a lot of examples for. I'm choosing Berserk, but really I could choose The Poppy War, which I haven't read yet. I could choose a lot of books that I either have DNF'd or that I am avoiding, because I know that these books delve really, really deep into some really, really tough topics. Namely, my biggest one is sexual assault. I typically don't like reading it in graphic nature or when it's brought up constantly in a book. It will sour the reading experience for me unless it's handled very delicately. It's just something that instantly I don't want to read about it. And yet, one of my favorite books that I read in 2020 was My Dark Vanessa, which not only is that the entire focus of the book, but it also has some very detailed scenes entailing this, which were incredibly difficult to read, but because the intention of the book was to, first of all, really delve into the state of mind of her when she was 15 and all this was happening to her, but second of all, like to show how much it has harmed her and her kind of shifting out of that perspective. And it was all done so intentionally. Beartown is another example. It's a tough read. That's the entire focus of the book. And there is a scene in there that is very hard to read and very detailed. And yet I love that book so much. So for me, this is like the pinnacle of what I keep saying. It's about execution for me. And this isn't me saying one way is wrong and one way is right necessarily. All I'm saying is for me, it has to be handled very intentionally and very sensitively in order for me to want to read it. And then if I do read it, I'll usually love it because I love what's being said. And then you have books that for me don't I can't deal with it. And I haven't read The Poppy War, so I have no idea how she handles that. But I know that there are certain books that I quit on or that I'm putting off reading because I know it's gonna be too hard for me to read. And yet some of my favorite books do those exact things. And I love them so much. And it's all in execution as well as just in the state of mind that I'm in at the time that I choose to pick up those books. But that one, I mean, I don't feel bad about any of these because preferences are completely subjective and everybody's allowed to like what they like. So I don't feel bad about any of these things that I'm quote unquote hypocritical about, which again, take that in a lighthearted sense. But this one especially, I don't feel any kind of way about because it's like, you get to choose what kind of sensitive topics you want to read about and when and in what context. Anyway, that's the video. Books I'm a hypocrite about. I would love to hear what kind of books are on your list of books that it's like, I shouldn't like you or I should like you, and yet. I think it's really fun to kind of dissect what tiny little things can make a book great or just not work for you, even if there's similarities in other stories. I just think it's a fun topic of discussion. So I'd love to hear more from you guys in the comments. What are some of your books like that? Are there any books on my list that you want to talk about more? I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.